Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how we do it here. We take something complex and
Yeah,
we break it down.
we go deep.
We go deep. And today we're diving into a pretty heavy topic.
Hmm.
We're talking about a historical proposal about taxation and reparations for Black Americans.
Okay.
The source material that we're looking at today is an excerpt. It's actually advocating for a renewed consideration of proposals that have been made in the past on behalf of Black Americans.
Mhm.
And what makes this one particularly interesting is the context surrounding it. So it's born out of this frustration over what's perceived as disparities in government support for different groups.
Mhm.
And the author even points to some things like the Asian Hate Bill, the Child Care Investment Act for Hispanics
Right.
as,
That's a scandal.
as examples of this. So that leads us to the core of what we're looking at today. What exactly is this tax exemption proposal? And why is it considered a logical starting point for addressing historical injustices?
Well, the proposal itself is pretty straightforward. It says that Black Americans should be exempt from all taxation until they receive equal justice under the law.
Okay, so it's a bold statement for sure. It definitely grabs your attention.
It does.
But what's the reasoning behind it? Like, why such a drastic proposal?
Well, the rationale kind of stems from this idea that if Black Americans aren't receiving equitable returns on their taxes, due to systemic inequality, why should they even be obligated to contribute to a system that's disproportionately
Yeah.
benefiting others?
Because you're saying it's like,
Yeah,
you contribute, you benefit.
exactly.
But if the equation's out of balance,
If you're putting in and not getting out,
then what? So this idea of tax exemption as a form of redress, is this a new concept?
no, not at all. Demands for tax exemptions and other forms of financial redress have been around for a while.
Yeah.
In the fight for Black liberation, there's a lot of historical precedents for this.
Give me an example.
Well, for instance, during the Civil Rights Movement, activists would often link taxation to representation. They'd argue that without full citizenship rights, Black Americans shouldn't be subject to taxation.
Okay.
And then again, during the Black Power movement, there were calls for community control of resources, including tax revenue, as a means of achieving self-determination.
So you're saying this proposal really builds.
It builds on that history of seeking economic justice.
That's really interesting. So it's like this proposal is tapping into this larger ongoing conversation.
It is.
But let's be honest.
Yeah,
It raises a lot of questions.
of course.
Like, what exactly does equal justice under the law even mean in a practical sense? I mean, how could you possibly measure that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Defining equal justice is incredibly complex. Is it about representation in government? Is it about closing the wealth gap? Is it about ending mass incarceration
Right.
and achieving true equality in the justice system?
And even if you could agree on a definition, how do you actually measure that?
That's the problem. It gets very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, it definitely does. And then on like a practical level, how would this even work? Like, how would you exempt entire group of people from taxes? That would have huge ripple effects, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Putting this into practice would be so difficult. Think about the potential economic impact. Like, how would the government even fund essential services?
Yeah.
What would happen to the existing social safety nets? It raises all these questions about social cohesion. Would this lead to further divisions or resentment?
So many unintended consequences.
There are a lot of things to think about, you
Yeah.
know? A lot of concerns.
Yeah, so we're left with this incredibly powerful proposal grounded in this history
Yeah.
of injustice, but also just fraught with these practical challenges and potential unintended consequences.
Right. It's fascinating, this proposal. Regardless of how feasible it actually is, it really forces us to think about some uncomfortable truths. It really puts a spotlight on the struggle. To address systemic inequality, it forces us to consider what true justice might actually look like.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about. And for you listening, I want to encourage you to consider this. What does this discussion reveal about the broader debate? Regarding reparations and systemic inequality, what are your thoughts? On the path to achieving equity, what do we need to do to actually get there? Do your own research, explore different viewpoints, come to your own conclusions. And until our next deep dive, we'll see you then.